where might we find opportunities for our students to engage in culture, even to disagree or to go out of our classroom to see what non-compliance looks like.
Welcome to Hallway Conversations. We're a trio of educators who have plenty of questions about teaching and learning and school culture, and we believe in the value of collaboration and reflection as we seek to keep growing as teachers. So this podcast is our place for thinking out loud together about issues in education and why they might matter to Christian educators. Welcome to the conversation.
Hello everyone, welcome to Hallway Conversations. My name's Matt Beamers.
I'm Abby DeGrow.
And I'm Dave Mulder.
Friends, welcome to the Hallway. Dave, Abby, and I are three friends and colleagues who have fun discussing different aspects of education and what it might mean to teach Christianly. This whole project started about a year ago when Dave and I were literally talking in the hallway, and one of us had the audacity to suggest a podcast. Even more audacious, we actually followed through. Things were a little bit off the rails for a while until Abby joined a few months into this adventure, and now suddenly we are beginning year 2. Thanks for being with us. Dave and Abby, in a few weeks, we're going to begin a 4 to 5 week book talk based on Lynn Swanner and Andy Wolf's wonderful new book called Flourishing Together, A Christian Vision for Students, Educators, and Schools. We're sharing this with our listeners because we want to invite them to join us. Friends, if you would like to join us, please purchase a book and read along with us each week. We'll give more information in the next week or so, but we wanted to give you a heads up and encourage you to read along with us and even submit questions for us as you read. Dave will put a link to the book in the show notes.
That's right.
So Dave and Abby, in thinking about books, and that is a wonderful book, and I'm enjoying it so much. We've kind of had a check-in question the last few weeks. So today's check-in question is book-related. What book or book series do you wish you could read over for the first time?
Ooh.
So think of a book or book series that you wish that you were holding for the first time and you had no idea what was about to unfold.
Oh boy.
Okay, so I think I've got the series that I would choose. Okay. I would choose C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia.
That was on my list.
Was it?
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, I just love those stories so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember the first time I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And that was a formative experience for me. I love fantasy anyway, but the allegory aspect of it just makes it a whole different kind of story too. And I just love those books.
Do you remember about what age you read it for the first time?
I would have read Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe when I was in 3rd or 4th grade for the first time.
And did you love it right away?
I did, immediately.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. And it's one that we've done it read aloud to our kids when they were little. I find those stories are just so compelling. Yeah. Every one of them. There's not a bad one in the whole batch.
I reread the whole thing when I was in college.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, which was super interesting to go back and revisit it at like a different developmental stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I remember reading it out loud to our kids too, and just over literally it felt like a couple of years, but just loved reading it and seeing them experience it for the first time. Yeah. I was thinking about this question, my initial reaction was going to be like Harry Potter, and part of it is we were I was in mid-20s, we were living in Montana, and it's the only book series or book that I can remember knowing the day it was coming out and driving about 20-30 minutes into Bozeman, where the closest city to buy the book, just being that enamored by it. So that'd be my easy answer. The other one's maybe a little more unusual. It goes back to grade 1 or 2, and it was Beverly Cleary's the Henry Huggins series.
Those are great.
And the reason I was thinking about that is because that's the first book series I ever read, and I was just starting to learn to read, and I just found it so I had no idea that you could have the same character in multiple books.
Sure.
I just remember just loving that so much, even at that age, sort of oh, what's going to happen to this guy, and feeling like he almost became a friend. So, I was going to go with Harry Potter, but I'll go with Henry Huggins on this one. How about you, Abby?
I'm just going to go with pure delight here instead of profound answers, if that's okay. I remember just tearing through the Hunger Games and being I think I read the first one in a day and a half, right? And I read them after all 3 were out, and I just immediately
back to back.
Oh yeah, for sure. I was just talking about that with someone else today, and so that because it was just so different, and something about the characters and the relatability to that, and just the thinking through the dystopian elements of that
it was amazing.
It was so good, right?
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so I have vivid memories of that. So that I think would probably be my choice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Friends, if you have a memory of a book or a book series or that you wish you could read over for the first time, or you got any feedback or questions for us for the podcast, email us at hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. That's hallwayconvospod@gmail.com. Dave, I believe you have a question from a listener. It was either audio or via email.
No, I've got one via email today. Okay. This is from a listener, but it's also our next door neighbor here in the hallway. Our colleague Ed Starkenberg asked us this question. So here's the question Ed asked. I understand the issues related to teaching for compliance, but what do we and our students miss if we don't ever emphasize compliance? Should we prepare students for aspects of life that expect our compliance, whether or not we agree? Thanks, Ed, for that question. And, I mean, I have opinions on this, right? I've talked before about my disdain for crappy homework that's assigned for compliance, and I think there's a lot of things that we traditionally have done in education where we think, well, we're going to make you do it whether you like it or not because it's good for you and it builds character and things like that. And I always want to check that impulse because there's a part of me that says I do want my students to comply, right? Like I do want my students to comply, but I don't think that's the point. I don't think it's about that. So I really appreciate this question from Ed asking that, right? What do we...
Dave, can I ask you just a question just in regards to what you said?
Yeah.
When you say you want your students to comply,
right.
What do you mean by that? And like what are you wanting in that?
Thank you for asking that. So when I say I want students to comply, I recognize that I ask my students to do a lot of what might be strange things. Like when you take it in the abstract, like all the weird things that I'm doing in class, and I just want them to play along. I ask that you do these things, right? And okay, maybe I'm a little unconventional as an instructor, so that maybe feels that way. But I think all teachers have that to some degree. We have expectations for our students. We want them to do certain things so that they will learn certain things. Yeah. And so when I say I want my students to comply, I guess what I'm getting at there is saying, play along. Yeah. The things that you're expected to do or asked to do those things, right?
But also trust that there's a reason for those, which I know you as a teacher well enough to know that there is.
Right. Yeah. And I always joke with students in Intro to Ed too, like we do a lot of weird stuff in Intro to Ed, and I say, there's a method to the madness. If you're ever wondering why I'm doing what I'm doing, just ask, because I will be very clear about it. But sometimes I forget to tell them. And so maybe that's on us as teachers too, when we're asking students to do things, like we should be that transparent with them.
That's something I've gotten better at since I've come to college.
Yeah. And I think teaching at the college level is different sometimes because it kind of works at two. I'm teaching the content, but I'm also teaching these future teachers how to be teachers. And so I've got to do both of those at the same time.
Well, my question, like I understand its question. My question is, what are we missing when we don't teach for compliance? I guess I would turn it around and say, how often aren't we teaching for compliance? And I guess that, like, I think in so much, we want them to comply. We hope they comply. Often if they don't comply, there can be issues around learning, behavior. So there is an expectation of compliance. I guess the reason I sometimes try to think about not teaching for compliance is simply because I think what we're asking of students is don't think deeply, just accept and receive. Like it's such a transactional, it's such a transactional thing. And my worry is when there's so much compliance in so much of what we do in school, and there needs to be to a certain degree, right? Like the bell rings to come in from recess. Students need to comply with that, right?
Come on in, kids.
They got to be there from this time in the morning, and they got to bring this, and they got to do that. Like what I imagine already so much of the day is focused on compliance. My worry is when so much of school is about already complying. We shouldn't be surprised then when students go out into the world and all they do is comply. And my wonder about it then is how do we educate our students to be shapers and formers of culture, to engage culture, which actually in my mind calls for a level of non-compliance compliance.
Right.
When all we've done is taught them to comply. Like, I can remember this as a teacher, right? Like, you want to set up a debate in class, or you hope students respond to a provocative question, and they sort of sit and look at me like, well, you want me to disagree? And you hope for that, and sometimes they go for it, right? And you have this rigorous class discussion. On the other hand, maybe we shouldn't be as surprised that they don't disagree, or that, we want them to make mistakes. Hey, we want this to be free and take risks and make mistakes. Should we be surprised when they're not so willing to do that, when so much of our system is actually about doing what we want?
Yeah. I remember the first time that I taught a senior English class, and I remember I purposefully gave them a badly written op-ed.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And we were looking at logical fallacies. Yeah. And it was the first time that someone looked at me and that it dawned on them that they didn't have to agree with everything.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That they read.
Just because the teacher says I should read this doesn't mean I have to agree.
Right. Like the look of dawning on their face that they were allowed to question something in front of them. And so I think, and no one ever said to them, you have to comply with it. Like, it's just baked in.
Yeah.
Right? It was, they had never considered the possibility before that something put in front of them wasn't right.
And that's my wonder. So I understand Ed's question, right? What is lost when we don't teach for compliance? I think whether we want to or not, if education is formation, I think the system is set up for compliance. From kindergarten to post-secondary, and again, it has to be at some level. Like when I go,
it doesn't work if it's not.
Totally. Yes. When I go watch, Heidi Walters was a magical grade 1 teacher. So much of her time, rightly so, in beautiful and wonderful ways, was trying to set up protocols and procedures in her classroom for compliance, not to turn them into robots, but because if you don't do that with 6-year-olds, Heidi wouldn't be a teaching grade 1 anymore. Like you couldn't do it. So on that, so I understand Ed's question, and that's where for me it's, where might we find opportunities for our students to engage in culture, even to disagree or to go out of our classroom to see what non-compliance looks like. I can remember, this is quite a few years ago, a social justice teacher taking a bunch of students into the city where I was living at, because there was a group of people who were basically living in tents kind of in the grass in a protest. And they, he said, we're going to go down there and figure out why are they non-compliant, why the acts of non-compliance. And I think about that often, right? Like, where do we get them to engage with the non-compliance? Because I feel like so much of it is about compliance. So how do we teach our students to disagree well? And
so this is my wondering too, right? Like, there is a time and a place. Like, indoctrination has such negative connotations, right? But I think there is a sense, if I'm indoctrinating students, like I'm trying to shape them in a particular way, and there is a time and a place for that. Is there also a time and a place to teach them to think critically and to analyze arguments and pick apart somebody and to, yes, I think we want both of those things to happen in schools. And so to pick up on that, I guess from Ed's question here too, like, what do students miss if we don't emphasize compliance? Well, I mean, to be a functioning member of society, there are times where you have to just be able to get along with people around you. And so that's, I think, part of the answer
and
to
do
that.
unpleasant tasks in the service of a greater goal.
Yeah, right.
Right?
But Dave, that makes me wonder, what are we missing when we don't teach for non-compliance?
Yeah.
It
should be both.
Totally, right? Like, if I think, what does it mean to, this sounds really pious, but if I think, what does it look like to model the way of Jesus in the world? Like, he didn't seem very Christ did not seem very compliant to me, and I say that
loving Jesus,
absolutely, right?
Yeah.
But he was so non-compliant. In fact, his non-compliance, led to his crucifixion, right? That he wouldn't play along with the culture.
And if you look at his teaching, like his whole kingdom is upside down, right? So, whatever the world values, that's the opposite in Christ's kingdom.
So I guess my wonder, and we're thinking out loud here because we did not spend time talking about this before. My wonder is if our students miss out on being also educated for non-compliance, because I think the compliance thing we got covered. Yeah, right. I'm actually not worried about that. Yeah. But if we miss out on teaching for non-compliance, is there a potential then that our students are not experiencing what it means to love mercy and justice and walk humbly with our God in a very different way, in a beautiful but non-compliant way, to be advocates for those who don't, to not just be a voice for the voiceless, but to raise the voices of people whose voices are unheard. Like, those are radical acts of non-compliance, I think. And we live in a culture, even as Christians, which is focused on compliance. It's right, like get in line, so to speak.
Right. Follow the rules.
Follow the rules, right? Whether that's in school or in our faith. So yeah, I don't know. Anyways, let's.
Yeah. Can I turn the conversation a little bit here? So something you said, Abby, reminded me of just the other day on Twitter. My friend Matt Vinscapen, who teaches at a local school here, and he tagged me in a tweet with some others. But here's the tweet. I'll just read it aloud to you here. So thank you, Matt, for this one too. Here's the pair of tweets that he says. When it comes to education, should the goal be to inspire a love of learning through every lesson, unit, and subject? This could be well-planned activities, engaging questions, or clearly articulated goals and meaning. Or are there topics where the focus isn't present, and we teach students that there are parts of their school day where the work will be hard, difficult, and painful, preparing them for a life where not every part of their jobs or their lives are rewarding or fulfilling?
And I think it's both.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Like I think my response to that tweet was something along the lines of, well, we've got to ask the question, and I know I always say it here, but what's the learning target, right? Yeah. I don't think teaching for perseverance is usually the learning target. Like bearing down when things are unpleasant, I don't think that's usually the learning target.
It could be a byproduct.
Right.
It could be an output, but it's not necessarily the goal.
Right. And that's kind of where I was going with this too, right? Like if my heart is in teaching students, like they're going to delight in this content, they're going to be inspired in this content. I think that's probably what I'm aiming for more often. Mm-hmm. But along the way, will they learn how to work hard, and will they learn how to persevere even when things get difficult? Well, I hope so, because sometimes even if it's something they delight in, that doesn't mean the work is easy. It just means it's enjoyable, even if you're working hard at it. I think.
Yeah. If I think about that in my own learning journey, which has been not easy at times for me, especially when I was younger, I would say I learned the places I learned about perseverance and grit and stick-to-itiveness, like keep going, was in the areas where I loved what I was doing. It was like, man, it doesn't mean it was easy.
But you loved it so much.
I loved it so much, right? That I stuck with it, right?
As someone who recently completed a dissertation, I can identify with that, right?
You love the work, but you grind it out.
It was work I loved, but I don't think I could do that if it wasn't, right? But there was definitely perseverance involved.
Yeah, and I do think that if I think about that with myself, right? So the byproduct in doing what I loved, even though it didn't come easy, and learning perseverance and grit in those moments, then allowed me, when I got to moments in my life where I didn't love it, to also then lean into the perseverance and grit. Like I can think of there's some horrible summer jobs where I was just like, oh my word, like this, right? You've learned those along the way, and I guess I understand the question. I guess it's more the suggestion that we're learning those things through unpleasant tasks, or that and there's an element of that. But do we also do we want school to be unpleasant? I'm not saying it.
That's not the learning target.
That's not the learning target, right? And there is like I can remember having to do unpleasant tasks in school around spelling and penmanship and dotting I's till.
Ooh, I love penmanship.
Yeah, right? So
why am I not surprised by that, Abby?
Yeah.
No.
In a
That was awesome. What are you talking about?
In a shocking revelation by Abby DeGree. No, I get the question, right? Because there is going to be elements of school that, no matter what, right? Some people are going to love the penmanship.
Yeah.
Some people aren't going to love, aren't going to, right? But again, is the target to teach them perseverance? The target ultimately is to teach them to be clear communicators, right? To honor God through the gift of language and things like that. Do they have to love it all the time? No. But I also feel like, hey, is there a way of, can I make this even as a teacher more enjoyable for whom the kids it's hard, right?
So I'm going to share with you guys wisdom from Grandpa Mulder. My Grandpa Mulder, he was the custodian of the Christian school that I went to, and everybody knew Mr. Mulder, right? He was just that kind of presence. But something we learned even as grandkids: work is fun.
Yeah,
work is fun, and he did his work as a custodian for the school to God's glory, right? Like that was it, and he took delight in the things he did, like even the crappy parts of cleaning the school after kids who don't take care. And he would say, work is fun. And he would say, this is part of, I delight in what I get to do with all this. So, of course, that's colored how I think, because I used to go clean the school with Grandpa when I was after school, right? But I think there's something to that. And for us, thinking about what we're doing as educators, like if we are so bent on making kids comply, we're going to make them do what we want them to do here, how are they ever going to learn that sense of delighting in things too? Right, and so work can be fun too. It doesn't have to be drudgery.
Right, and it can serve a bigger purpose, right? It can also teach that idea of service toward something larger. Right.
Yeah, like I'm part of something bigger, right? I have responsibilities here. I do need to contribute, and I get all of that. But I am thankful for the teachers in my life who, at times when it was hard for me, and I was learning things like perseverance and grit, also tried to meet me where I was at in my misery and tried to lighten my load a little bit. Because that's also a powerful example to me, right? To say, like, I know this is hard for you. How can we work at this together? And learning things like charity and grace, what that looks like, is also a really powerful model.
Definitely.
Friends, we know that your time is valuable, and we want to thank you for joining us today for another hallway conversation. So whether it's this day, this week, or this month, we hope the Lord gives you what you stand in need of. And as you head into this week, we want to send you with this blessing. May the road rise up to meet you. May the wind be always at your back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. The rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you in the palm of his hand. Thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good week.
This podcast was quite literally dreamed up during one of our actual hallway conversations. Our music is by Ethan Mulder. Hallway Conversations is an independent podcast created and produced by Matt Beamers, Abby DeGroat, and Dave Mulder. Thanks for listening. I got one more. I was just thinking, Abby, your book choice that you said, The Hunger Games, it's like an exercise in non-compliance.
It is.
The whole book, right?
The whole thing.
Yeah.
All right.
You can add it.
Righteous non-compliance in the Hunger Games.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Righteous non-compliance.